Now, theological education for the 21st century has to self-consciously embrace the varieties of the human family as the only context worthy of the gospel. And pastors must be educated to open their congregations to this diverse human family in creative ways, even when the immediate surrounding demographics make this a challenge. To the diversities I have named must be added those of economic class. In particular, no responsible theological seminary in this century can fail to sensitize its graduates and the church's future leaders to the scandal of poverty in a world with the resources to feed everyone. That is just unacceptable for the church of the future, and it is unacceptable to educate leaders without an awareness of that. This is one of the reasons that we have diverted resources and labored mightily to bring to final reality a downtown campus. Because we don't find even this location, although we're in the boundaries of the District of Columbia, it is too isolated from the realities of the city. And so we want a footprint there. And we've just opened that building and dedicated it on October 27th. If the church fails to do this, it will make the church increasingly irrelevant, because linked to poverty, intimately linked to poverty, are a host of other challenging issues that threaten the future of our world. These include racism, nationalism, environmental degradation, adequate health care, adequate education. All of these have a link to poverty and economic inequities. The diversity of the church is also its most important resource in providing an adequate biblical, theological, spiritual, and liturgical base for linking the love of God and the well-being of our neighbor. We are enriched by a growing diversity of worship styles, preaching idiom, theological contexts and perspectives, and patterns of spiritual formation that grow out of our human diversity and help direct our response to the challenges of the 21st century. We worship, study, and pray better when we are enriched by the wide variety encompassed by the body of Christ. A second point I want to make, second dimension. Theological education in the 21st century must be global in its vision and in its commitments. One could hardly imagine two church leaders with a more global vision than the Matthews brothers. They understood in all of their leadership efforts that the vision for the church of the future must be global, and the breadth of places around the world represented even in the gathering in this very room is a witness to their global efforts. The renewal sought by Joe Matthews and the Ecumenical Institute could not be confined to efforts in Chicago's Fifth City or even to the churches of the U.S. Other efforts, including the Institute for Cultural Affairs and all of its branches and networks, embrace global vision and global reach. And the global vision of James Matthews is legendary. It took him to India, where the church would not leave him because they needed Episcopal leaders to urge the church to a truly global consciousness adequate for the last part of the 20th century and into the current 21st. And he has been tireless in raising global consciousness and creating global networks, both for the United Methodist Church and as a tireless ambassador to the global ecumenical church. No conception of theological education to prepare leaders for the 21st century could keep faith with the Matthews legacy if the perspective of that education was not global in scope. But in institutional terms, this is easier to say than to do. It requires some fundamental alterations in consciousness and commitment of resources. The seminary that educated me in the 60s was not capable of that kind of global vision and consciousness, and had not made the commitments to do so. When I began seminary teaching 38 years ago, theological education had some individual faculty members of vision who sought out of their own experience to bring the world into the classroom, and those were pioneers, important witnesses. But the fundamental enterprise of theological education was fairly local and regional in its orientation. There were some international students whose presence helped create some consciousness of the church beyond the boundaries of North America. And some of these students have gone on to become great leaders in the world church. And some faculty led travel study programs to various parts of the world. But these were expressions of individual faculty interest and not of institutional commitment. And I can tell you from experience that faculty members who did that usually were told, well, yes, you can do that, but it can't count as a part of your regular teaching load. Excuse me. It's an extra. That'll enrich us. It'll enrich your use of time. But don't expect that it will replace any of the really important things that count towards your teaching load. That's the way it was. In the 80s, there began to be a concern for and a discussion of what was called the globalization of theological education. The Association of Theological Schools, which is the professional organization that accredits almost all of the seminaries in North America, over 280. The ATS became committed to the importance of globalization in theological education and sponsored conferences, consultations, and publications in this area. Some foundations became interested in this concept and diverted resources and funds toward that end. And perhaps the most important of these was an effort by the Plowshares Institute under the leadership of Robert and Alice Evans, and with the support of some other foundation funds, that launched a project in the globalization of theological education, taking the entire faculties and key administrators from a representative group of about 20 theological schools on global immersion trips to meet leaders in the global church and experience their ministries. These schools were then challenged, as part of their participation in that program, to develop a project in their own schools that concretely sought to embody a greater global vision in the enterprise of educating church leaders. That was the commitment of each school when they accepted participation in the program. Wesley Theological Seminary was one of those schools, and I think those trips were transformational to this school. In small groups with faculty from other schools, the Wesley faculty traveled to China, to Peru, to the Philippines, to South Africa, to Mexico, and to El Salvador, and others, I think, that escape my memory. We were also challenged to immerse ourselves in the other worlds of our own cultural context. A part of this program was to say that the world outside of our consciousness is not always out there. Sometimes it's under our nose. And so, under the sponsorship of this program, the entire faculty of Wesley Theological Seminary moved for 10 days to the southernmost county in West Virginia, which was currently listed at that time as the poorest county in North America, to experience the ministries and the reality of ministries in that context. And then we coupled that with a week living in hospice shelters in downtown Washington to experience the ministries of an inner city right under our very noses that still was often not a part of our consciousness. The local project that resulted from this experience was the institution of a cross-cultural requirement of all students for the MDiv and the MA degrees at Wesley Seminary. So you cannot graduate with those degrees unless you have an experience of significant cross-cultural immersion in a cultural context different than any you have known. And there was a commitment that went along with this by the Wesley faculty to continued participation in the leadership of such a program, to often be the faculty members that helped organize and travel with such groups. Every student must spend several weeks immersed in experiencing the ministries of the church in a cultural context different from their own. And let me tell you, there was tremendous resistance to this in the beginning. Overwhelmingly, voices came out of the woodwork almost saying, well, this will be great for students who are able to elect that, and it will surely enrich us if some students do this. But they argued that students couldn't afford it, that students often had jobs or churches that would not allow them such time away, that faculty would consider this an extra load to their present teaching, that the school would have to add personnel to administer such a program. And those of us who helped craft this program and design it said, yeah. All of that's true. But we need to do it anyway. After several initial years of this program, the voices of dissent around this program totally disappeared. The students and the faculty came back reporting transformational experiences. They became witnesses to their fellow students and faculty colleagues. There is an office for cross-cultural immersion on this campus. There is a brochure put out every semester on the different opportunities that might be available for fulfilling this requirement, and there are waiting lists for the programs that are listed. And the students and faculty of this school have been everywhere. I mean, really everywhere. And they come back to share in every class in the curriculum. It's as likely to crop up in a biblical class or a church history class or a pastoral care class. And that's where the real payoff is. It continues to be a central part of the Wesley program. Wesley was one of only a handful of schools to adopt such a requirement in the 80s, but it's becoming more common in theological education today. I'm very gratified to see so many more schools adopting something like this. From such stirrings at Wesley came the adoption in 2004 of the school's current strategic plan, which I mentioned earlier. And in that strategic plan, there are 5 major goals for the entire future, the next generation of life here at Wesley, preparing leaders. One of the 5 goals is to become a truly global seminary. That's one of the goals. The intermediate steps cannot be chronicled here. We don't have time. But the important thing to note is that from an additional degree requirement, Wesley now understands global vision and commitment to be fundamental and foundational to the whole enterprise of theological education. And from my perspective as dean at Wesley for the past 11 years here, is what I would describe as the most fundamental change. Wesley has moved from programs that merely enrich the perspectives of its own students, which is a worthy goal, but has moved to engaging in genuine partnerships that help strengthen the preparation of leaders around the world. Enriching our own students is not enough. That might just be a kind of theological tourism. We have to participate out of an abundance of resources compared to much of the world in helping to build the world church. And if our business is preparing leaders, we have to say, how can we help out of our abundance in the preparation of leaders on a global scale? This is consistent with the vision of the Matthews brothers, who were never content to bring wider vision to the immediate locales where they lived and led. They were constantly fostering enterprises and entering partnerships and channeling resources, sending people, bringing people to further the sense of the church as an interconnected global enterprise that we are all a part of. That's our goal, to recognize and live out of an interconnectedness that is a reality, but too often a hidden reality in the life of the church.